Hi, if everybody could take a seat, we're going to get started here. Well, we welcome you here today. Today is Tuesday, April 10th, 2018. It is 12:30 p.m., and this is a roundtable discussion number 2208 entitled The Rising Tide of Women in Politics. My name is Leslie Smith, and I actually have been at CU since 1989, so it's really great to be here today. It's the first time I've gone to the CWA because I'm usually working, so it's fun to be the moderator. I'm Associate Director of the Science Education Outreach Program for the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences series, just located across the way. It's the largest research institute on campus with about 850 scientists and staff. The reason I was asked to lead this roundtable discussion is because I'm actually one of those rising women in politics. I ran and served 2 terms on the Boulder Valley School District Board here locally, and I am retiring at the end of the month to run for the CU Region at Large race, which is a statewide race. Thanks so much. So we're going to get started. This is a little bit different than a regular panel session. It's a roundtable discussion. I will briefly introduce each of our illustrious women speakers. They have amazing resumes, and I'm not going to read through, but you'll be able to look through them yourself. I'll just touch on each area. And then we're going to just dive right into the discussion. And as you know, towards the end, I'll be getting questions from the audience. And let me just tell you about what I need to read here. We will utilize both the CWA app. So how many of you will be using the app? So a fair amount. And then also a note card system. Both ways. To ask a question in the app, simply select this session, the scheduled tap question and answer, and then insert and send your question, and it's going to show up here on my computer. You may also raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers. Please write legibly, and I will give first priority to students. So either on the note card or in the app, if you could say I'm a student, then I'll know that I should be taking yours first. And then before I introduce these women, I'd like to let you know that this panel has been underwritten by the CU Environmental Center, which is helping us to reduce the CWA's environmental impact. The center's support has enabled the CWA to purchase carbon offsets for speaker airline travel, to reduce its paper consumption by creating our app, to promote our live streaming platform, and to offer free HOP bus service. We encourage you to make use of these resources during your time with the CWA. All right, so to get started, we've got Heather Hurlburt in the middle, and she currently directs the New Models of Policy Change Initiative of New America's Reform Program. She has been focusing on policy and especially in polarized times, which I'm sure she's got a lot to talk about because things are very polarized, aren't they? She's also a columnist for the New York Magazine and co-hosts the Dresbert podcast. And with her international policy background, she's held management positions with many international social justice NGOs, such as Human Rights First. To the left of her is Erin Velarde, founder and CEO of Vote, Run, Lead, or VRL, combining digital technology and training to increase the number of women in political leadership. And I know from my campaign, I'm using a lot of digital media, so it'll be interesting to hear. Maybe I can pick up some tips from you. She's got an amazing resume for such a young woman. She focuses on leadership development of clients, I'm a climate change scientist, clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to girls' initiatives reaching across the globe. And then finally, right next to me is Teresa Younger, President and CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women. And I'm sure a lot of us remember in the 70s when that was first started. It's the longest standing women's organization in the U.S. Foundation. I immediately thought of Gloria Steinem, and of course the picture shows up on the webpage, and there's an award named after her. She's also created the hashtag MyFeminist, creating a space for national debate on feminism, and she's led the fight to leads the fight on women's issues such as women's health, safety, and economic justice. And somehow, with all her work, she finds time to sit on a number of boards, too many to list, but her passion is obvious for social justice, particularly for girls and women, for people of color and low income. So let's thank these three for being here, and let's get started. So, since this is the rising tide of women in politics, please tell us why you think that it is now that women are surging forward to run in politics. I know just in our case, for the statewide race, we have at least one woman running for each office, except for treasurer.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin. Nice and close. Okay, microphone. We'll be friends today. So I'm the founder of Vote, Run, Lead. We train women to run for office and win. 70% of our candidates in 2017 won. 60% of our... we have alumni right here in Colorado, including Representative Faith Winter, who just got her sexual harasser kicked out of the state legislature a few weeks ago. Chrysanta Duran, your Speaker of the House, one of the few women of color Speaker of the Houses. That's not how you say that. Speakers of the House across the country. And we have been doing this a long time. And so originally at an organization called the White House Project. Many of you might be familiar with Marie Wilson's work. She was the first head of the Ms. Foundation, my political mother. And that's where I first launched Vote, Run, Lead. In 2014, we brought Vote, Run, Lead out as a standalone organization to use those digital tools to reach women all over the world. And partially because we were hearing from rural women who told us that they needed more resources and couldn't continue to come to urban centers to get the kind of civic education they were looking for. So I've seen, I'm 37, so my resume hopefully is on par with my age. And so I've been doing this work. Somebody called me the grandmother of this group the other day, and I was very upset. So I'll take young woman. But what I saw after the presidential election is something I've never seen, and I've been doing this work since 2002. So after the presidential election, we saw that women told us they wanted a 5-year, prior to the election, they wanted a 5-year plan for running for office, which you know is one of those vague, like, oh, a 5-year plan, right? After the election, 60% of women told us they wanted to run by 2020, and that has held steady. So there's a reality about the political now that women are feeling at their core. Prior to the election, one of the biggest barriers was confidence and qualifications. We felt like we have to learn more, that we may not be the right person for the job. You know, God forbid we actually know what we're doing before we take a job. But, you know, they really wanted to know every single thing about running for office before they would say yes. After the election, it was, tell me what office you're running, tell me what office I can run for. And I had never seen that. So that was, we are also seeing a surge in the number of women of color. The direct sort of anecdotes that we're getting is they really do feel threatened under this presidency. And that is a real feeling that they are taking to government. A couple of things. I don't think we get enough press that women are patriots. And we are very upset by what happened around the election. So I was pushing reporters to cover that as one of the main 3 or 4 reasons that I felt women did not like that our American democracy was under siege. Of course they didn't like that it had to do when the first woman president was running for office. So that was the double whammy. Yes, Hillary was a factor, but I actually think that women saw President Trump as someone who had no political or military experience and believed that they could run for office. I'm saying that in the nicest way possible. Right? So that qualifications thing really totally shifted. And there's early research from the Barberly Family Foundation on those qualifications, and I think they're doing more research to see what that impact is following the election. And then finally, the third area is we really felt like everyone felt that their issue was under siege. Now, this was both for Republican women and for Democratic women, that the things they cared about or the party they thought they were in or things we thought we fought for and won 25 years ago, 30 years ago, were now back on the chopping block. So no matter what your issue was, it somehow felt like it was whether it's climate change, the Paris Accords, it felt like this issue that we've already all agreed was a fact and was something that was good for the country was now being questioned again. So those were the three reasons that we really heard, both the sort of patriotism, the change in qualifications and believing that we were the right people for the job, and that the issue that I cared about was there. And then over all of that is women were angry. And we've channeled that anger in a new way. Whether that's the Me Too movement, the women's marches, or running for office, we have learned to channel our anger. I don't know if it's because we were raised by a bunch of feminists or what's happened and changed, but that we are channeling our anger into political power, and that's something we're really excited about at Vote, Run, Lead.
Yeah, I want to pick up and amplify one thing, Erin, that you said, which is the trend, the numbers of women running for office, which are amazing and fantastic. They shouldn't be as surprising to us as they are. The reason they're so surprising is that the coverage of what's happened in this country since the election is incredibly skewed. And it's really interesting. And sitting in Washington, I have a front row seat to how often the stories about the resistance and the stories about state and local election still focus on sort of the same old 10 white guys and the groups they run. And whereas if you actually go out and look at what's happening on the ground across the country, and it sounds like Colorado is very typical in this regard, the surge of women running for office that Erin talked about is kind of the cream rising to the top of the surge of women moving into political awareness and political activism. And I'm cheating and I have my laptop up because I wouldn't remember these numbers otherwise, but that 58% of women say they're paying more attention, and that's considerably higher than it is for men. The number of women who say they've gone to an event or a protest is considerably higher for women than for men. And the gender gap in approval of Trump, which is typically about 6%, is 12%. It's higher than it's been since we started keeping track of a gender gap in presidential approval. So just at every level, who is organizing resistance, who is engaging, who is organizing town meetings, who's going to demonstrations, that is all female. And the wonderful people who are running for office, like our panel chair, are doing it on the back of this broader sort of American political reawakening, which I think is happening for all the reasons Erin talked about. And it's going to have some interesting consequences and wrinkles and challenges that I hope we talk about later.
So I'll start out. Thank you so much. First of all, I adore Erin and have known her for years. She's really old. And Heather and I were just talking about how we keep passing each other in the hallways of many of the conferences that we go to. But I want to start out today by just acknowledging that today is Pay Equity Day. Because that I think holds... It's how long it takes into the calendar year for a woman to be paid the same amount as a man. That's if you are a white woman, and if you are a white man. That totally changes if you add in women of color, so Black, Latino, and Asian women, which means we're just going to wait another 3-4 months before that actually gets into play. One of the things that my bio does not mention is that I'm also on the board of the Women's Campaign School at Yale, which is a 1-week campaign training program to train women to run for political office and to run political campaigns, which is the other half of what's really important when we talk about how women are rising in this time, which is where we hold influence, which is really important, and I'm going to touch base on that in a moment. And then the other thing that's not in my bio, because there's a lot of stuff in my bio, is that I actually was the executive director of the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women in the state of Connecticut for 8 years, where I worked on state public policy and recruited women for state boards and commissions and helped organize the Women's Caucus. So the idea of being present in where women are holding influence and power and what that needs to look like, I think I have as broad a perspective as my colleagues on the panel in a slightly different way. And at the Ms. Foundation, the way we look at this is how do we support women in leadership who are doing work on the grassroots level? And I think we're actually, in a slightly different way, at a perfect storm in this country, because we actually have many years of women in state activity in the grassroots level. So whether it's in their churches, whether it is on their school boards, whether it is on their finance boards, who have been slowly chipping away at building an understanding for what's going on. So I think that is happening on one level. I also think that in many states throughout this country, state legislatures are in budgetary crisis. And women are finding a voice because they understand budgeting in a way that many people don't recognize, that we understand what that impact looks like. And then thirdly, you add the national, well, as my colleague says, there's a dumpster fire going on. I call it something different, but she calls it a dumpster fire. So I think there's a dumpster fire going on. I think all of those three things at this very moment in time has seen this significant surge in the number of women running. Now, on the flip side, I absolutely agree with this conversation that we're having around who tells the story and what those numbers tell us. Because I want to pick up on something that Erin mentioned, which is the number of women of color who are running for political office, but also the storyline on how women of color have saved this country. And we need to have a really clear conversation. What happened in this presidential election and the last two presidential elections, what happened in Virginia and Alabama, are completely because of black women in this country. And you need to thank them, and then you need to support them. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think we all have very different perspectives and yet complementary perspectives on why we need to have more women running for political office, how we need to support them, and to even challenge ourselves to feel a little uncomfortable about the expectations of who we support, when, why, and how.
And I am more than happy to continue questioning, but if any of you want to respond to each other, just jump right in. So I did get a question from the audience for me to ask. How many women are running or thinking of running for office?
In the audience?
Yeah, come on.
Hold your hand high.
Raise your hand.
Yay. Well, I know a couple of you touched on the notion of training. And I had no training when I jumped into school board race. And then I did Emily's List training. So I found that very helpful. So for these people that are interested in running and other people in the future that might be interested in running, do you think this is an important thing to get involved with? And how many different training programs are out there? And how do you decide which one?
So we're the best. I really do believe that, right? I know it sounds like,
It's pretty good.
but
It's right up there next to mine. It's really awesome.
But it's because it's all that we do, right? We are laser focused in making sure that women have the civic literacy, the networks, the capacity to run as they are. Following the 2016 election, April of 2017, we launched a new curriculum called Run As You Are. And it is a blend between the research on women's leadership, what we have learned from our co-founders and from women who have been running for office at the local level. So it's been built by local candidates and elected officials across the country, and based on the 12 years of what it actually takes to accelerate women's timelines, the kind of choices we're making, what do women face differently that men don't, questions they don't have to ask. And we built it in a way that we're growing into it. So Run As You Are is a 6-point curriculum that just one of the pieces is actually how to run for office. The other pieces include things like pro-democratic practice, so that when you get into government, you actually know what it means to be open and transparent, to keep voter registration rolls open, why you would have same-day registration, what transparency in government means, and making sure that folks have an understanding of that when they get into public life. One of the key pieces is called feedback and practice, because what you have to do is try this on. Politics is, IRL, as the kids say, in real life, right? You can take all the online courses you want at Vote, Run, Lead, but then you have to go knock on doors, and you have to interact with people, and you have to be able to ask questions. There's a resiliency that comes with running for office. There's a stamina that comes with running for office. And so we've took a long time to look at this and then to say, in the political climate, what do we need to build that is meeting the needs of the tens of thousands of women who are now 58% more interested? And what we found was there is pretty low civic literacy. So folks don't know what a county commission does. We don't really know how many hours a week you have to spend at the city council. What gets legislated at the state level that doesn't get legislated at the local level? If I care about this issue, what local government office actually legislates or rules on this issue? So we had to step back and, when women were saying, okay, I'll run for office, tell me which one to run for. So we had to go back a little bit and, begin to say, what are you motivated by? What are your interests? What kind of leader are you? We've got a small assessment that we feel puts women into, a personal path. It's called the 90-Day Challenge. It's 30 actions in 90 days that will accelerate your political capital, will help you figure out what office to run for, and decide, who it is in your community that you want to align with. And you'll begin to sort of flex those muscles, get into the political space, have those conversations. And it's something we're constantly iterating on. And it's something that we're constantly updating and taking feedback. And it's also something that we are happily giving to other organizations. So this is not proprietary curriculum in that way. We're in a coalition with 7 other national organizations, and we have shared Run As You Are as the curriculum. A group called Democrats.com uses one of our modules that has the highest completion rate on their site right now. And so we want to spread this out because we believe that the philosophy of running as you are, you do not have to change into a traditional political mold to be a successful candidate, is what is needed right now in this political environment. And I believe it's what voters are looking for. And we saw it last year with the women that we had running across the country. We saw it in Illinois at the local primaries. We had 11 women run, 9 were women of color, 7 won, and 6 of the 7 were women of color. And they beat the political machine in Chicago. And so that's why, if there's so many good resources out there, get connected to a program, but also don't feel like you have to take every course on our website before you can run, right? I don't want to put that either. You can learn on the job. You can, by the time you get elected, have figured everything out, right?
Or not.
Or everything you need at least to be a good legislator. But do get those skills, do get yourself connected to a network, but you really do have what it takes to run for office already.
I agree, but I will say not everybody should run for office. And I don't want to be negative about it. You need to do the work. You can't half raise your hand in an audience that says you're running for office. You have to raise your hand. You have to stand up and look yourself in the mirror on a daily basis and say, this country, this community, my family needs my voice. I need to be able to listen, right? There are some real things that have to take place in order for that to happen. And so to the men in the room who wake up and look themselves in the mirror and go, I'm going to run for political office today. That is not how women run for political office. We wake up, we say, after the kids have graduated, after I've saved the world, after I've saved all the money I need to do, then I'll run for political office. And we no longer can, wait for that to happen. But we need to recognize that there are multiple roles for us to play in being involved in a political process. And so you need to do the steps that it takes to determine whether it's the right thing for you. Because guess what? The media is not nice to you. They will pick out everything that's wrong. You want to stay authentic, but guess what? Sometimes you have to dye your hair. There are realities to running for political office that you have to feel really comfortable with, and you have to be willing to push past, and you have to be comfortable enough with yourself in order for that to happen. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I'm a big promoter of is that there are multiple ways for you to participate in the political system. And when we talk about the number of women running for office, right now, I think the last number I heard was there are 30,000 women running for political office from local level all the way up to congressional office. On top of that, we need finance chairs and campaign chairs and communications associates and consultants and pollsters. So there are a lot of ways that you can be involved and engaged in a process that allows for you to amplify and lift up the voices of those most needed. And I actually want to ask Heather a question because you're looking at this from a very different perspective. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of give us some background on what that looks like from a safety perspective, what that looks like from a national perspective, what that looks like from what you're doing.
Right. Well, I actually was going to offer an anecdote that I think nicely illustrates some of the points that you both made. I am currently more or less out of the training business, but I did for a number of years train a very large number of Democratic House and Senate challengers on national security issues of both genders, and that tended to be a particular problem for my women candidates because they would come in feeling like, oh, I don't know this issue, I don't know how to talk about it, I don't know what I'm supposed to say, and they would face a media and public environment that despite all the progress we've made, and we've made an enormous amount of progress, but you saw this in 2016 and you still see it in polling, there is still a non-trivial swath of the public that when it thinks about security, security has a male body and speaks in a deep voice. And I'm sorry to say, if you look at the numbers, that's Democrats too. So as a woman, you are facing a number of additional burdens in my area, some of them self-imposed, some of them not. So the anecdote I wanted to share is that well over 10 years ago, I was doing a training for candidates, and a young woman candidate running for office for the first time, who shall remain nameless, was at this training, and her even younger campaign manager came up to me and said, we'll call her Susie, does Susie have to say kill? And I said, if Susie can't say kill any differently than how you just said it, the word should never come out of her mouth. Because that was ridiculous. So I said, all right, let's go talk to your boss. And now this was more than 10 years ago. It was a lot closer to 9/11. And she says to me, well, I never served in the military. I don't know how to talk. I said, you have to have an authentic way of connecting with voters' fears around this issue. And she said, but I don't have an authentic way of connecting with voters' fears about this issue. And I said, okay, where were you on 9/11? And she said, I was in my office in Manhattan. And I said, were you worried about your family? Yes, I was terrified about my family. What would you have done to protect your family? Okay, right there, you've just clicked into an authentic experience that you share with at least 50% of the population. I said, so I know every bit of advice you've been given up to now has told you that the way you're supposed to connect with voters on national security issues is like somehow you're supposed to go back in time and be a man who served in the military after high school. But in fact, most American voters connect with security issues through their own feelings of security about themselves and their family. And hey, guess what? You're going to be much better at that than your opponent is. And I went home that day and I thought, that was interesting. I don't know if that'll work. We'll see what happens. So that person is now in the Senate and a frequently mentioned presidential contender. So it worked out pretty well for her.
That's great. Let's see. Erin, you brought up Faith Winter, and she's my hero, Shiro, for standing up to Randy Lebsock, who got expelled. Only 2 people in 150 years have been expelled. So we have the Me Too movement. I've got a couple of questions related to that, and you can tackle what you would like. And let's start with Teresa. First, do you think this movement will continue? Will there be backlash from it? How do you see a way to solve this issue? And might this be a turnoff for women to run?
Okay.
And you don't have to answer every single one.
Will the movement continue? Yes, because we have, and the reason why is actually how we solve the issue. We haven't seen changed male behavior. We haven't seen societal change and cultural change yet. So what the Me Too movement has done, as I haven't assessed it at this point, is it has, quote unquote, empowered women to tell their stories. What we need to do is get women into power so that they can change the policies, and then we need to work as a culture to change behavior. So I don't think that we have gotten to, it's going to go on, because every day we hear not just a new story, we hear of a new industry that this is getting into. Will there be backlash? Absolutely. Any successful campaign has backlash. And we should expect that backlash to happen. In fact, I was literally just meeting with a group of philanthropists who were talking about how do we fund and support the movement towards putting women in power as opposed to just empowering them to tell their stories. And one of the conversations that we talked about was that we needed to be prepared and recognize that a backlash is going to happen. And it is happening if you talk to any of the women that have been leading these efforts. And, I always like to remind people that Me Too, the initial front half of the Me Too campaign, when Me Too started 10 years ago, it was started so that young Black women and girls did not have to tell their stories of sexual abuse. All they needed to do was say Me Too. There's been a change, right? Because now the assumption is if you say Me Too, then you will tell your story. But we need to be hypersensitive to the fact that people can say Me Too and not tell their story, and it's still a valid story. And what Me Too has done for us, which I think is really important, has allowed us to believe the stories that people have to tell and not just belittle them and not say that you need to have 6 other people who agree with your story. So that belief level is really significant in how we are going to see women running for political office and have political activity into the future, because they will feel like once they have validated and told their story, they have the power and the confidence to run for political office. So I'm a supporter of the Me Too campaign. I think it's amazing. It's an amazing awareness for what it has done. I think it shocked people into taking action. I think it has been complemented by all of the other movements that are going on throughout this country. But I will say that until we see an absolute changed male behavior and changed cultural behavior, we're going to still have these instances. But I will say, many Capitol buildings only had bathrooms that had male bathrooms, right? All the bathrooms closest to the legislative offices were male bathrooms, and the women's bathrooms were always 3 floors down. Now we have, I worked at a state capitol, now we have women's bathrooms on the same floor. We have all gendered bathrooms on the same floor. We are going to make the progress that we need to make in order to raise the level of awareness around this. State legislatures and Congress are looking at how they are, changing the policies and the training mechanisms for what needs to happen in this. So I think there is a lot of movement that needs to take place, but I think it is taking place across the country, and we have to hold each other accountable for what that looks like.
I want to pick up on one thing Teresa said that I think is really important. We know training to prevent sexual harassment really doesn't work very well. The thing that works is as Teresa said, putting women into positions of power. So I'm just curious, how many people are in a workplace like mine where someone has gone and said, well, because of Me Too, how are we going to change what we do in the office? And the answer was, we're going to do a training. So that doesn't work. I mean, we know across industries that doesn't work. And that is as true in politics as any other industry. And I want to pick up also on the backlash piece, because one of the backlashes I think we're seeing in politics at the federal level, and it happens to be the case that I think this is particularly affecting Republican women, And frankly, in the long run, we're all going to be better off if we see a surge on the Republican side that matches what we're seeing on the Democratic side. But instead, both because of backlash to Me Too and because of the cultural conservatism of some folks who are currently in power, we're seeing a move toward, well, the way we protect women from being harassed is a man can never be alone with a woman. You've seen in my field, the national security field, women being moved out of jobs they had held. The senior ranks of the Pentagon are almost empty of women because of cultural concerns at the top about being alone with women. That's not productive, it's not helpful, and it's going to really set back the next generation of women who don't gain the security experience to run for office and be effective. So I think that's one small piece of a much larger national backlash that's going to affect, and like everything else about Me Too, the most awful effects are felt by the women who have the least power to do anything about it, which is not us and not women who are running for office by and large. But it is going to be reflected in a way that actually makes women's progress in politics harder in the future, and we're all going to have to think about how we counter that.
I do think it will continue. I don't think it's going anywhere. We did a poll with Bustle in March, and it actually found that women did feel like consequences were being had for the first time. So that felt really good, that some things were actually happening and there were consequences. Now, those consequences I don't think were swift enough. I don't think they're institutionalized. This idea that this man may be ruined because he can no longer have this prestigious job when we've lost tens of thousands, if not millions, of talented women in the workforce, is this an equation that we need? It's still an unequal equation. And to continue to hold that, to continue to make space for women who don't want to share their stories, I agree. What we're seeing on the campaign trail is that women candidates are using their Me Too stories as a part of their expertise, that they have been through something like this, that they have handled it, that it's made them stronger. They may have not, gotten the outcome that they wanted, but they are sort of sharing that resonant story. It is a way in which women are speaking collectively, and I do see it across the aisle. It's much quieter on the Republican side. But I was at the NPR headquarters in D.C., and I went into the bathroom, and the mirrors are covered in Post-it notes of positive affirmations. One is like, don't worry, that spinach looks great in your teeth, right? It's because they're in this, liberal bastion of a news outlet, and they've had this going on for years and years and years, and they've all just been living with it. And now they no longer have to live with it. And I think that's the change that I'm excited about. But then you have someone like, what's her name? Mona Charen, thank you, who at CPAC said to, conservative America, we have to be talking about sexual harassment. We have to be talking about, the culture in which we're treating women. And she ended up having to be escorted out by security, right? So she got a very quiet echo chamber on Twitter and an email from women on both sides of the aisle. But publicly, we don't yet have that echo chamber for conservative women to have that safety net around the Me Too movement. So that, I do think that's something where we need to see that. We also have to hold them accountable, that it can't be just Mona all by herself talking about it at CPAC. And that the feminist panel at CPAC was like, how terrible women are. It was a terrible panel. And it doesn't have to be, because we are seeing, especially young, progressive Republican women, and I swear they exist, who are pro-choice, who are pro-immigration, who are pro-LGBTQ, but are pro-taxes, who are hawkish on foreign policy, and they're not Democrats. And the idea that they're going to switch over to a Democratic Party that, if you ask people running for local office, couldn't tell you what the national platform for Democrats is right now, you're not going to move them over. So we have to make room for those voices, and I think it's a huge opportunity for a diversity of women within the Republican Party and on the right to say, this is not my party. I can get behind pay equity because I want 30 more cents and 46 more cents in my economic pocket to put into the economic engine of my community. They don't come at these issues in the same way that on the left we talk about social justice and, it's a just and fair thing to do to pay women equal pay for equal work. They're coming at it from different reasoning, but the policy we can get to together, and those are the things we have to create some sort of echo chamber for them to step into, while also holding them deeply accountable for, I think, letting some of these institutions actually turn into these environments where it's okay that at the Pentagon we just move the women aside. So how we do that, I think, is by, and I want to come back to the hair dye thing, because we have this private Facebook community where her name's Eve Hurwitz. She's running for the Maryland State Senate. She has purple hair. She's a veteran. She's a mom of 5. And the party told her to dye her hair plain brown. And she's got like the dip. I don't know if you've seen the dip. It's just the ends, the purple ends. And she literally couldn't go door knocking because she just didn't feel like herself. She's had purple hair. Every minute she gets out of the military, she dyes her hair purple. Like it's her thing. Her car is purple. Her whole theme is purple, right? Her tagline is the difference you can see. It's an amazing. And, she called me in tears to say, I have to dye my hair back. I don't actually feel empowered to go out and do what I need to do. I'm not going to make those same choices. And the Facebook group is 30 comments deep of women with different color hair running for office around the country. And I say that because I think what we do too often is we look at the 535 seats in Congress and the 50 governor seats, right, which are major executive positions with billion-dollar budgets underneath them, and we make those same assumptions about the 519,000 local and state seats across the country. And they're very, very different. Running for local office, running for state office, you don't have to make the same kind of sacrifices. Yes, you're going to have the media ask you stupid questions. Yes, they're going to look into your family, but these are also your neighbors, who have known that Eve has had purple hair for as long as they have known her and want to know why she's letting somebody tell her how to change her body, right? And now she is the nominee of the Democratic Party for her state Senate seat, and they're telling people no, don't run. Eve has this, right? And it's that kind of, that's what we're seeing with young women who are saying, I'm not wearing makeup. I don't wear makeup. I'm not wearing a suit. Yes, I will look professional. Yes, I will put in the hard work. Yes, I will do what it needs to do. But I'm not going to sort of change who I am in order to fit into this political system. And that's, I think, what's exciting. The backlash will be that a lot of us will lose. So I want us to be prepared for a lot of us losing in 2018. First of all, the math isn't there. We have 3 and 4 women running for the same seat. So just simply put, the math isn't there, right? Second of all, majority of those women are running for extremely tough seats. They are Democrats running in very tough red seats. NPR has a really good article on it. I do want them to run and lose. I want them to build that political capital. I want them to give voters a choice about who they can vote for, increase the populations who are turning out to vote, and then make sure that when that district does switch over or does have a change, that some guy who isn't Jim John's, second son is getting, has put his 10 years in the party, gets to have that seat. That she's already made those relationships. She has that fundraising list. She's been through the sort of trial and error of doing it, she'll do it differently this second time around. So I want us to be prepared for the idea that, all these women who ran, they all lost. So I want us to have our talking points about, how the math makes that happen and how great it is that they all ran, because men have been losing for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Can I make one other point about accountability that you made me think of? Something that I do not observe happening is any checking of backgrounds of candidates in 2018 or any interest in the Maryland Democratic Party, which is one I know, of checking whether their male candidates have past histories of sexual harassment that are going to be embarrassing. And there may be some states that have actually sort of considered this as in terms of whether you back a candidate or not, but I haven't seen it anywhere. I'm curious if either of you has. And what that's going to mean is that we're going to have another round of embarrassing revelations about elected officials, and then we're going to again face well, how dare you go after Senator so-and-so because he's in a purple seat. So I think that's a crisis that we're going to have in the future that we didn't need to have if we were really at a point where we were willing to view sort of past mistreatment of women as something that makes you unfit for office. But I would love to hear from one of you that I'm wrong, and in fact, we are now policing this. Hey, a girl can hope.
Yeah, it's always good to have a dream. So I'll give you an example. When I was working in Connecticut with the State General Assembly, we had a young 16-year-old woman, a girl, who came up to testify in a budget hearing around an internship that she had gotten working at a state zoo, a local zoo, and we had it was appropriations committee, which had 2 women as chairs of appropriation, and one of the she was talking about how she had learned to overcome her fears in handling snakes and working with other animals, and she did an amazing job of testifying at 15 or 16 years old in front of this legislative committee. And one of the legislators, African American male legislator, said, "I'm so happy that you learned how to deal with snakes and that no longer scares you. I have a snake here under my desk. Would you like to come and see it?" On camera. And, it was public. And, there was like this dead silence in the room while everybody tried to determine what happened. And the reason I tell that story is, people didn't respond effectively when we, as head of the Women's Commission, called him out on it. We turned it over back to the people to make a determination about whether this behavior was acceptable and was this the elected official that they wanted to have. He got reelected. Yep. And this young woman was 15 or 16 years old. So, I say this goes to my conversation about how we have to not just have women running in political office, but we have to have them in positions of influence so that we can hold these levels of accountability there. But I'm not seeing it on any level in any of the states that I'm watching about how state parties are approaching this issue.
No. I'm not seeing it either, actually, on a party level. I'm definitely not seeing it on the right. It's quietly happening, I would say, a little bit in some state parties I'm seeing on the left. What I will say is a little bit of good news is this is the year of the retirement. People are resigning, they're moving to other positions, and they're retiring in really high numbers. And I think men are making a calculation. Some of these state legislators, they pay $12,000, $30,000. They have a Me Too, they've done something in their past, and it's not worth it, right? And that's great. It's like we could use a sort of a cleaning house in that way. So we are seeing a little bit more of that, opting out, but we can't count on men to self-police in that way. We have to have those mechanisms. And I know there's definitely been press here on Faith's story, but she did go to the Democratic Party at first, and she has shared this, so I'm not sharing anything that she hasn't sort of given us permission to share. And she told Lebsack that if she had heard of him doing it again, she was going to take it public. And she heard of him doing it again. And the party had promised that he would get counseling, that he would stop drinking, that there would be all these things that would have gone into place. And I'm not sure that they did, right? And so I don't also know that the political parties are the place where we want to be counting on folks to sort of do that internal policing. They have hard enough time with the primaries. So I do think it is about making sure that those women are in those positions of influence, that those are the women who are writing the laws in the committees, that we're having the public hearings, that it doesn't take 6 or 7 women or 16 or 18 women to validate a story. And I think part of that is that there's a tough conversation about inside the workplace, what kind of policies this is going to be, who are men that are going to come forward and have those brave conversations about policy change, to say the current folks that are potentially in power are actually not able to write these laws. The current folks that are in the Pentagon, that are in private America, private sector, are not actually capable of writing these laws. So we need to figure out, what does the internal policy structure look like? Does it come from the bottom up? Does it come externally? Is this a state law, a federal law? But we have to get creative around this, because the people who are currently able to set those standards are actually, unfortunately, very likely to have in a past instance have been a perpetrator in some way, statistically speaking. Mm-hmm.
Oh, some of these stories are really unsettling. So we're going to switch over to the audience questions. But there's several questions related to Trump and educated white women that voted for Trump. And, is there a way that we can woo them over and see the light? And I think it's interesting with your comment, Erin, about creating a bigger or maybe a more inclusive echo chamber so that women in conservative circles can start pushing against that. So that's sort of all balled up together. But
I mean, I think there's good news, and there's also like let's sort of set a realistic goal here. Gender has been a less relevant factor than political identification for quite a while now. That there isn't, or there wasn't before 2016, the gender gap the way it gets sold to us. There is a partisan gap and there's a race gap. And you are much more likely, you have been, to vote based on some combination of your partisan identity and your racial identity, which helps explain why white women behave so very differently from women of color, particularly black women. Now, you, and if this were any time before January 2017, that's sort of where, I mean, my answer would have been a very stern lecture to you about how there wasn't really a gender gap. And you have to understand that white women are functionally white men. There's a whole other conversation, sorry ladies. There is a whole separate conversation about, and credit to a woman where it is due, Kellyanne Conway is really the visionary of looking ahead in the Republican Party, seeing that Hillary Clinton was going to run, figuring out a strategy of how to keep Republican women voting their party identification over their gender identification, trying it out in the 2014 Senate race, including, I'm sorry to say, in your Senate race here in Colorado that year, where one of the main reasons Udall lost was that he lost his margin with women. This happened in a lot of other states too. White women, again. So there are reasons, and it's interesting because Kellyanne Conway has had to face, I mean, she had to fight within the Republican Party to get this attention on women, but it worked for her. And she is reaping the rewards of it, such as they are. But since 2016, we are seeing some defections among upper-income white women. And I'm guessing that you both can talk more about that than I can. So on the one hand, yes, we're seeing a shift among suburban white women and highly educated white women. On the other hand, we're also seeing an awful lot of partisans really dig into their partisan identity and resist sort of things that you would think would change it. So let's be careful that we not make our lodestar chasing after conservative white women.
anybody else?
I'll let Teresa close out on this. We have to get into rural America. We have to get into rural America with feminist conversations. We have to get into rural America. We have to get into rural America with feminist conversations. We have to get to women farmers. We have to get to these young women who are leaving rural communities for college educations, for urban centers. We have to move back to rural communities and fight for the kind of communities that we want to build. I see more of I do see, especially as you go higher up in political office, that partisanship trumps gender always. And I totally agree, and I know Teresa will talk more when it comes to folks of color and identity politics there. It's just, I don't know what's going to happen to the Republican Party. I think some of the ways to look forward are, and this may be controversial, it's also the first time I'm saying this publicly, how do we get women who maybe today or maybe after the meltdown are thinking, okay, I maybe made the wrong decision in 2016. I actually don't know how to sort of move them into a conversation, right? There's a lot of anger still about how disappointed we are that you sort of didn't vote with your vagina, right? And that's never going to happen. So that frame is actually incorrect. I don't know what the right frame is, but what are those conversations? I think they're kitchen table conversations. I think they're family conversations. I think we have to talk about why women are still voting the same way that their husbands are voting. Why I got emails that said my mom hasn't told my dad that she's voting for Hillary because this is a Trump household. This is a Trump community. There are Trump stickers, lawn signs. There's no room for me to put a Hillary lawn sign on my yard. So there's you're in these communities where the entire community is thinking and talking in one way only, and there's no discourse. So that's something I think we really need to do. There's a level of accountability. Two things that excite me are at the Women's March in Detroit, the conference that they did, the Women's Conference, the Confronting White Womanhood conversation was out the door with a line and had to be repeated twice. There are definitely young white women who are having these tough conversations and holding their sort of mothers accountable and their family members accountable. I do think that gun control will be one of the issues. I do think that Me Too can be one of the issues that sort of moves the needle here. And I do think we have to, the third way I think is that level of patriotism, that this isn't good for our country, and that we have to be able to put the patriotism above the partisanship. I don't think we put the gender above the partisanship in order to potentially move conservative women over. And I'm saying this as an individual, not as a representative of Vote Run Lead. I think someone like an Amy Klobuchar, who is from Middle America, I think you're going to see a bunch of women run for the presidency. I think Kamala Harris is definitely going to throw her hat in the ring. I think Gillibrand is definitely running, and I think Amy Klobuchar is running. And I think this Amy Klobuchar is the United States Senator from Minnesota. She's the senior senator. And it's that kind of, I think it's going to be that somebody like her that is going to be able to say, I'm just like you. I've come from this community. I have more rural in my background, where she's also been putting domestic violence laws on the books. She's worked in a bipartisan manner. I think that's someone that in 2020 could actually be peeling votes off from Republicans. From a sort of political analyst, not as a representative of Vote Run Lead, I say that.
Oh, you always say such good stuff, Erin. So first off, please don't ask me about white women.
And there are a lot of white women here.
I know. You have to talk to each other. I'm sorry. There's a reality going on, and I'll be real, real talk. I can't tell you about what's happening in your communities and in your homes. I can't even tell you what's happening in my communities, in my home, right? I am a 40-plus-year-old black woman who was raised in North Dakota who now lives in Brooklyn, New York. The complexities of my life are pretty broad. The complexities of your life are pretty broad. What I think the last election cycle told us and reminded us is that we are not monolithic as women. And we forgot that. We thought, just as Erin said, if you had a vagina, you were going to go one direction. And that is not true. And we haven't given a full recognition to the complexities of the lives that women lead in this country. And we have to get there, which I think is really, really important. The other side of this is the work that I've been doing at the Ms. Foundation is how do we extend a conversation and the tent of feminism and inclusiveness and diversity that actually is respectful and that is based on values and not based on confrontation. And so if we can figure out how to make the door really wide, how to make the entryway really long, and how to roll up the sides of the tent, we will get to a very, very different conversation around what we're looking for. We don't have an understanding about civic engagement in this country. We have taken civics out of most high schools. So people don't understand what that looks like. They don't understand why we have electoral politics. They don't understand the electoral college and what that needs to look like. They don't understand that we only have a two-party system in this country and how maybe we need to be rethinking that. They don't understand how we just need to have a conversation that's not about an argument, that's about listening to how people got to where they are. And so I'm, very much understand that there are people that sometimes it's easier to just vote than it is to vote with a conscience. Sometimes we just believe in our hope and our vision and our dream of what we think will happen. And we have to believe that people are functioning in the betterment of what they believe will happen for themselves and their families. And so while I can make myself, I literally didn't get out of bed for a few days after the election. All of the work I have done my entire life was a reflection of what happened those next couple of days. And I was standing on the floor. I think, weren't you there too? We were standing on the floor when we were told to go home, right? The night of the election after having spent many hours of working. One of the things that I think is really reflective of that time and of that moment, that this is hard, and that we have to actually believe that people believed that what they were doing was not just about suppressing and stepping on people, but maybe making it better for how they perceived the world to be. And we all have different perceptions around what the world is based on who we are. Our lived experiences are different. And they're different in so many different ways. And so I think as we move forward, we need to start conversations with, can we have a conversation? And then be willing to listen. And what women need to do who are running for political office, and as I say, enlightened men also, is we need to stop and listen to what people are saying and say, can we agree on a value? And yesterday I was on a panel called Down with the Patriarchy. And one of the conversation points was, I believe in a value. My value that I believe in is the social, political, and economic equality of all genders. That's a value statement. If we can believe in that, and when I say that in rooms, and I don't care what your political background is, I don't care what your gender identity is, I can get 90% of the room to agree on that. If we go to our values and less about our ideology, I think we can build the tent that's big enough for us to figure out how we can solve these very complex problems. And if we don't do it soon, the disruptions of society are going to overrun them, and we're going to be responding, not creating solutions. And I think it's really important.
I want to say one other quick thing about people made choices in the 2016 election, right? You had choice to opt out, which we saw a lot of folks actually not vote. But you had choices where folks saw particularly conservative women telling me, I saw who Trump was. I knew who Trump was. I'm not fooled. I'm the CEO of my own company. I'm the SVP at, X. I'm a smart woman. I made a calculated choice in which I thought Hillary Clinton was the worst choice. And so we actually have to dig into that. There's something about why the first woman president, probably the most qualified person who has ever run for the presidency in the United States, was somehow able to be painted in a way that was a less than choice than Donald Trump in the 2016 election. So there's a narrative that we also have to.
All right. I could go on listening to you three forever. This is a great conversation. We do have a lot of questions, and we're not going to be able to get to them. But I do want to, we've got, let's see, 7 minutes left. And we have several student questions. So if you can maybe somebody raise their hand and say, I'll take this, and not speak too long. Let's see. On the international level, how do you feel politics is evolving, and in what way America might play a role in that? And I think maybe that might be your question.
Well, I mean, as far as gender is concerned, the really interesting thing is that we are solidly in the middle of the pack, that there are lots of countries that are well ahead of us on women, and there are lots of countries that are way behind us. And there are also lots of people in lots of countries looking with exactly the same kind of bewilderment and shock that was just described about 2016, and sort of wondering, how are women in this incredibly wealthy country, in this incredibly sophisticated and open country, gonna respond to that? So that's maybe a super short answer to that question.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm going to direct this one to you. I am a student in the business school and find it difficult to be taken seriously and viewed as capable by the men in the school. How as a woman do we navigate this issue, especially in politics?
Me?
I don't know, which one would be? Go for it.
Sure. Screw them. It's part of it is like do some research on like reading about resilience, like understanding like what it is about you that will able you to sort of fill your cup before going into these tough situations. But like have some of the vocabulary that you want to use with those folks, get that stuff on the record, whether it's contemporaneously like writing an email to yourself so it's there, writing an email to HR, reporting it, like having them, this culture that we're talking about, they're not just going to wake up one day and go, oh, I should really be more respectful of her and ask her for her ideas. Like, we are going to have to make them feel uncomfortable. That's going to be uncomfortable for us. Practice that. Practice what you're going to say in front of the mirror. Write them an email. Make it happen. Stand firm once you do it. Know that, yes, there will be some backlash, but say to your professor, I used to coach for the in-between White House Project and Vote Run Lead. I used to coach women in corporate America on how to go into their reviews. And a lot of the things in their reviews, they would say things like, well, you're just too nice, or, nobody really likes you. You don't like go do this sort of like external stuff. And the answer to that every time is, could you explain to me how that affects my bottom line? Right? And, it's with your professor and with your fellow students. When they say the things that feel diminishing, you can say, can you explain to me how that affects what's happening right now? Or can you explain to me how that affects the coursework or my leadership in this class? You have to be ready with some of that stuff verbally to come back at them. And your voice may shake a couple of times, but like once you get it out, it's like, yes, right? And, supporting other women in the classroom where you think that may be happening to them, building some of those alliances. But this is going to be a power through moment for you where it is a little bit of just, you're going to have to build up that resilience, figure out what that is for you, and you're going to have to cut through that noise.
And seek out other women. We have to support each other. If you think that you are the only one, there are women who have paved a road in front of you. Find them. They are more than willing 99% of the time to offer you an ear, a shoulder, yes, you go get them, and find them. And if you're one of those people, make yourself available. Be a mentor, be a sponsor, know who they are, and reach out. That's really important to build out your network. Build it strong and build it wide.
And that's good advice for any of us. So thank you. All right, we have time for one last question, and that's going to be for you. Okay. Let's see. As a woman about to receive her bachelor's degree, what is the biggest step forward I can make toward political change? Is it running for office, getting a graduate degree in policy, or something else? Maybe that's it.
We're almost done. Whatever you want to do. If you think that there is a straight road for how you should engage in this process, you are sadly mistaken. So whatever you want to do, get your 4-year degree, pay attention to where your passion is, align yourself with what you want to do, build out your networks, ask yourself the tough questions, get comfortable raising money and having money. All of those, know who you are. All of those things are important, but it is really, really not about a straight line. Right. It is about how many times you take a left turn. It means you stick your nose out in front. You look both ways. Sometimes you might get a little ding on the side, but you keep going. And it is all about figuring out where you want to be, not how you want to get there.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.